When my son told me I wasn't welcome at his house for Christmas this year, I smiled politely, thanked him for his honesty, stood up from his living room couch, and in that moment, I began planning the most satisfying decision I've made in 5 years. You see, some betrayals don't come with shouting matches or slammed doors. Some come wrapped in soft voices and scented candles, nestled beneath a 12-foot tree with ornaments I helped pay for. Ryan's words were measured, almost rehearsed, like he'd been coached. I could see it in the way he shifted uncomfortably beside me, hands folded neatly, wedding band catching the twinkle of the fireplace. "Dad," he said, "Lauren's parents are coming in from Portland this year, and, well, things are a little tight with space. They have some traditions." Traditions? That word sat heavy in the air, like the over-decorated garland hanging above their mantel, artificial, showy, and a little suffocating. "Traditions that don't include me?" I asked, gently. "That's not what I meant," Ryan said quickly, eyes darting toward the hallway like he hoped Lauren would step in and do this part for him. But she didn't. She never did when it mattered. They just... they prefer a different atmosphere. A quieter one. A quieter one. The irony made me smile. I, the man who'd financed their first down payment, remodeled their entire kitchen, and sent them $2,800 every single month for the past 5 years. Suddenly, I was too loud, too inconvenient, too much. "Before we continue," I said with a calm that even surprised me, "make sure you've subscribed to the channel, and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're listening from tonight. I'm Frank Delgado, and this is a story about family, dignity, and the moment a man decides to stop paying for his own humiliation." I took in the room. Every surface whispered of money, comfort, taste. The hand-knotted rug imported from Italy. The velvet drapes, Lauren said, were essential for privacy. The marble coffee table that took me 3 hours to move in last spring. My fingerprints were on everything metaphorically and literally. "You remember the turkey I used to make?" I asked, one last attempt at warmth. "The one with the sage stuffing your mother loved?" Ryan nodded once, then looked down. "Angela used to say it was better than her grandmother's," I added softly. Silence. He didn't deny it, but he didn't meet my eyes either. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said. "Maybe we could do something the weekend after." As if Christmas was just another appointment that could be moved around for convenience. I stood slowly, knees stiff from years of hard work and long hours spent laying tile. A life of labor, of doing the right thing even when no one noticed. I walked toward the door, past the framed family photos where my face grew smaller and more distant in each one. Past the side table that held Lauren's collection of expensive candles, none of which smelled like home. At the door I paused. "Tell Lauren's parents," I said, not turning back. "Merry Christmas, or better yet, Feliz Navidad." I stepped outside into the December air, crisp and unforgiving, and made my way to the pickup truck I could barely afford to maintain, thanks to 5 years of bank transfers that had gone entirely one direction. The neighborhood twinkled with holiday lights. Wreaths on every door, blow-up reindeer on manicured lawns, warmth spilling from the windows of houses where families gathered without shame or pretense. I sat in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, my phone buzzing on the console beside me, probably Ryan again, or Lauren trying to offer some soft compromise to ease their guilt. I didn't answer. Instead, I started the engine, watched the headlights sweep across their perfect little lawn, and drove into the night. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I had finally reached the threshold of something stronger than both. Clarity. By the time I reached the red light at Oak and Fremont, I was no longer thinking about Christmas. I was thinking about numbers. About how 5 years of $2,800 mortgage payments had drained not just my bank account, but my dignity. About how Lauren's $1,000 stand mixer sat unused on a marble countertop, while I'd been living on peanut butter and off-brand cereal for months. About how Angela's life insurance, meant for peace and security, had vanished into crown moldings and custom cabinetry. The light turned green. I pressed the pedal firmly, not out of anger but purpose. I was going home, not just to my house, but to myself. And what came next would not be loud, or violent, or dramatic. It would be quiet, calculated, and it would change everything. I pulled into my driveway just after 8 p.m. The cracked concrete, the flickering porch light, the faded paint on the door, they all seemed to stare back at me, ashamed of their condition. And why wouldn't they be? For years they'd been ignored, sacrificed at the altar of someone else's comfort. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the chipped paint on the garage door. I had promised Angela I'd repaint it this spring after she passed. That was 8 years ago. But instead of fixing what was mine, I'd been fixing someone else's dreams. Inside, the house felt colder than I remembered. It wasn't the thermostat, it was the absence of laughter, of cooking smells, of her. The absence of a family that used to gather here before it became too small or too far, or not suitable for the kids. I set my coat on the hook Angela used to fuss over. You hang it properly or not at all. Frank, and walked into the kitchen. My phone buzzed again. Lauren's name. I let it go. A minute later, a voicemail. I didn't bother listening. Instead, I opened the drawer by the fridge, the one with old takeout menus and expired coupons, and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't touched in months. Inside were bank statements, mortgage papers, copies of wire transfers. I laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. Numbers, dates, all cold and indifferent, but each one a wound I hadn't let heal. $2,800. Every 15th of the month. Auto debit to Ryan and Lauren's mortgage servicer. I had set it up after Ryan lost his job in 2018. Just for a little while, Dad, he'd said. We just need to get through the rough patch. That rough patch lasted 5 years. I did the math again, slowly, deliberately. Year 1, $33,600. Year 2, same. Year 3, I started shopping at discount grocers. Year 4, I skipped my annual eye exam. Year 5, I was eating ramen for lunch. Total, $168,000, not including the $47,000 down payment I'd pulled from my home equity. Not including the $18,000 kitchen renovation, Lauren said was non-negotiable for resale value. Not including the thousands I spent on new furniture, landscaping, utilities they forgot to cover. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then I reached for the bottle of cheap bourbon in the pantry. I poured a glass, neat, and stood over the papers like a coroner performing an autopsy on my own generosity. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't turn on the television. I just stood in that kitchen, sipping, remembering, regretting. The next morning, I called my bank. A woman named Sandra answered, her voice chipper and efficient. "How can I assist you today, Mr. Delgado?" I cleared my throat. "I need to cancel an automatic payment." Immediately. She asked for my information, then confirmed the transfer. $2,800 to North Star Mortgage, account ending in 6,174. "Effective next cycle?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "Effective now." There was a pause on the line, just long enough to register surprise. "Of course, Mr. Delgado. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help with?" I closed my eyes. That question echoed in my head. Is there anything else I can help with? I had been helping for so long, I'd forgotten what it meant to be helped. "No," I said softly. "That's all." And for the first time in years it was. I hung up and sat down at the table, the cancellation confirmation still glowing on my laptop screen. I looked at the cold toast on my plate. I smiled, because suddenly everything felt different, lighter. I spent the rest of that day doing something I hadn't done in years, taking care of myself. I ordered a new water heater, called the handyman to patch the drywall above the staircase, picked out a new recliner online, one that didn't squeak every time I sat down. And then I drove to the store and bought Angela's favorite brand of coffee, the kind I used to think was too expensive. Back home, I brewed a fresh pot and sat on the porch. The steam rose into the December air like a promise. I sipped slowly, watching the sun sink behind the pine trees, the last golden rays brushing the roof of the home I had kept, protected, and loved even when no one else did. I thought about Lauren and Ryan, in their house full of things I paid for, planning a Christmas dinner I wasn't invited to. I thought about how much silence I had bought with my kindness, about how often dignity is traded for proximity, but not anymore. That evening I gathered the bank statements and mortgage documents and fed them into the fireplace one by one. I watched the flames curl around each page, each sacrifice, each apology I had made with my wallet. The room grew warmer, not just from the fire, but from the sense that something had finally ended. The bleeding had stopped. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Lauren. I didn't answer. I poured a second cup of coffee, reached for the crossword puzzle Angela used to love, and circled the clue for 7 across. Delayed gratification, 12 letters. I smiled. Postponement. And that, I thought, is exactly what they'll get. The next morning brought a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The kind of stillness that doesn't just settle over a room, it settles into your bones. My second cup of coffee steamed in my hands, the good Colombian blend Angela used to spoil herself with. I'd been saving it for a special occasion that never seemed to come, but waking up in a house where no money was silently siphoning out at sunrise, that felt special enough. At 10:23 a.m., my phone rang. Lauren. Her name flashed on the screen like a siren, all capital letters and false charm. I stared at it, let it ring once, twice, and then picked up, curious more than anything. Frank, she started, skipping any greeting. Can you pick up my parents from the airport today? They're flying in from Portland, Alaska Air, Flight 314. Should land around 2:10. No hello, no how are you? Just a directive, crisp and transactional. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. You do realize we had a conversation 2 days ago, right? I asked. You remember the one where I was told I wouldn't be welcome for Christmas dinner? There was a pause. Long enough for me to picture her standing in her open concept kitchen, manicured fingers drumming on the granite countertop I paid for. Frank, she said, switching to that syrupy tone she used when she wanted something. That was a misunderstanding. Emotions were high. Let's not dwell on the past. We need to focus on what's practical. My parents need a ride, and you're available. That word need twisted something in me, like a reminder of just how far they thought my usefulness extended. Why not call a cab? I said, knowing exactly what her answer would be. Because, she snapped, the charm wearing thin, they don't know the area. They expect someone reliable. And let's be honest, you're not doing much. My jaw tightened. Lauren, let me ask you something. Why me? Why, after cutting me out of your holiday plans, do you think it's appropriate to ask me for favors? There was a silence again. But this one wasn't from uncertainty, it was from disdain. Because that's what family does, Frank, she finally said, each word dripping with a kind of smugness that only people raised in entitlement can conjure. Family helps. And frankly, you're not exactly in a position to be spiteful, are you? The audacity stunned me into silence. Besides, she added, voice now low and sharp, let's be honest, you were never really part of our family, not in the way that matters. You don't understand our world. You never did. There it was, the curtain pulled back, the truth raw and graceless. I let the words hang there between us like smoke. What airline again? I asked quietly. Alaska. Flight 314. Baggage Carousel 4. And Frank, please don't wear anything distracting. You remember that blue shirt you wore to Ryan's graduation? That'll do. It looked decent. I said nothing. She took that as confirmation. Great. They'll be expecting you. Bye now. The line went dead. And with it, something else inside me did too. I sat there, phone still warm in my hand, letting her words echo. You were never really part of our family. Not our family. Not her family. Our. She had pulled Ryan into her world so completely, so surgically, that I'd been carved out like an appendix, unneeded, unmissed. But something else sparked in that silence too. A kind of focus, an intention. I looked at the clock. 10:47 a.m. I had 3 hours, 3 full hours to decide how much longer I would allow myself to be used. I got up, rinsed my coffee cup, and dried it with a dish towel that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. Then I pulled out the same briefcase I used when I ran Delgado and Sons back when I was somebody in this town, when people respected me. Not because of money, because I earned it. With sweat, with decency, with grit. I opened it, slid in the copies I'd printed the night before. 5 years' worth of canceled checks, wire transfer receipts, loan documents, and mortgage payments. The truth, organized and undeniable. Then I sat down at my desk, opened my browser, and typed in the arrival time for Alaska Air 314. On time. Good. But I wasn't going. Not to the airport, not to the dinner, not anywhere they expected me to serve them like some invisible butler in the background of their curated life. At 2:10 p.m., I was exactly where I wanted to be, sitting on my front porch with a fresh cup of tea, watching the winter sky stretch pale blue across the horizon, the kind of peaceful day I'd almost forgotten I deserved. At 2:28 p.m., the first call came. Lauren. I let it ring, then another from an unknown number, probably one of her parents borrowing a phone. I ignored that too. By 3:05 p.m., the buzzing had become rhythmic, insistent. I muted the phone entirely. The silence felt like revenge without a raised voice. Around 4 o'clock, I heated up a bowl of Angela's chili from the freezer, poured a glass of red wine, and opened a crossword puzzle. The clue for 8 down? Taking control. 7 letters. I didn't even need to guess. Reclaim. By 4:30 p.m., the knocking started. Not the polite kind that waits to be heard. This was a pounding, the kind that rattled windows and demanded submission. I stood in my hallway, teacup in hand, staring at the door like it might splinter off the hinges. I didn't move. Not yet. Let them stew. Let the cold December air introduce them to humility. After the third round of violent banging, I finally opened the door. Ryan stood there, wild-eyed and breathless. Behind him, Lauren's parents, Judith and Malcolm, stood bundled in coats they clearly weren't used to lifting their own luggage in. Their cheeks were flushed, whether from anger or embarrassment I couldn't say, and Lauren brought up the rear. Mascara smudged, her carefully curated image beginning to crack. "What the hell, Frank?" Ryan barked before even stepping inside. "You left them at the airport for over 2 hours." I stepped aside, letting them file in, if only to stop the drama from unfolding on my front lawn. Judith brushed past me with an audible scoff. "This is no way to treat guests, especially not at our age." Malcolm gave me a look I'd seen before, the one that came right before a condescending lecture. "Do you realize the kind of trouble you've caused?" He snapped. Taxis were all taken, the terminal was chaos, and we waited in the cold like... He trailed off, unable to finish a sentence that would require admitting he'd been treated like a common man. Lauren slammed her purse on my coffee table. "You embarrassed us. In front of my parents. You made a scene by doing nothing." I stayed calm. I wasn't aware that declining to be your unpaid chauffeur qualified as a scandal. "You told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. That made things pretty clear." Ryan threw up his hands. "That wasn't about you. It was about managing expectations, keeping the holiday smooth. You know how Lauren's family is about appearances." "Exactly," Lauren interjected. "And you just made a mockery of all of it. My parents had to stand at baggage claim with strangers, Frank." Strangers. I took a breath, slow and deep, and turned to look at all of them, these polished, brittle people who had once made me feel like the outsider in a house I'd helped build. "You know what's funny?" I said, voice low but firm. "This is the first time any of you have stepped into my house in over a year. You didn't come for Angela's memorial. You didn't visit for Thanksgiving. But now, suddenly, when it's cold and inconvenient, I'm worth a knock on the door." Judith started to say something, but I held up a hand. "No, let me finish. For 5 years I've paid your mortgage. I paid for your kitchen, your landscaping, your furniture, your fancy blender you used once. I've sacrificed my comfort, my health, and my dignity. And in return, I was told that my presence, my cooking, my voice, my history wasn't compatible with your dinner party." Lauren's face twisted. "That's not fair. We never asked you to sacrifice." "No," I agreed. "You didn't ask. You expected. You assumed. And when I finally said no, you treated it like betrayal." Malcolm snorted. "This is all very theatrical, Frank. But let's be honest, you're not exactly in a position to hold grudges. We're family." That word again, family. So often used as a leash. "Family shows up," I said. "Family doesn't blacklist you from Christmas and then call you when the car service falls through. Family doesn't treat you like staff." Ryan looked away. Judith adjusted her scarf. Lauren's eyes darted around my living room, taking in the furniture she hadn't seen before, the new armchair, the updated light fixtures, The subtle signs of a man starting over. "Is this why you canceled the mortgage transfers?" she asked. "Because you felt unappreciated?" "No," I said. "I canceled them because I finally realized I was funding people who wouldn't even offer me a seat at the table." Silence, thick and electric. Judith's voice finally broke it. "This isn't over, Frank. There are consequences to abandoning people. People talk." "Let them," I replied. "I'm done explaining myself to anyone who only values me when they're stranded at Carousel 4. They didn't stay long after that. No dramatic exit, no final insult. Just the sound of Judith's heels on the walkway, the car doors slamming, and Ryan's brief glance over his shoulder as if realizing, for the first time, that I wasn't going to chase after him. I closed the door, locked it, turned off the porch light, and sat down in my new armchair. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was something else entirely. Free. And tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I begin the part they'll never see coming. 3 days later, while sipping my morning coffee and flipping through the local paper, I saw something that stopped me cold my own face, staring back at me from the third page, above a headline that made my stomach turn. "Spokane man abandons elderly couple at airport during holiday chaos." The photo was old, probably pulled from my old business's defunct website, my expression frozen mid-speech, making me look vaguely unhinged. I set my mug down, heart suddenly hammering, and read every word. According to the article, I had stranded Lauren's parents, respected members of Spokane's business community, at the airport in dangerously cold conditions, forcing them to navigate a stressful and potentially hazardous environment without proper support. There was even a quote from Malcolm about how I'd refused multiple calls and left them exposed to the elements. The article didn't mention the weather had been a sunny 51 degrees. It didn't mention that I'd been disinvited from Christmas dinner just days before. And it certainly didn't mention the 5 years of financial support I had funneled into the very household that now painted me as some unstable recluse. The source? Patricia Morrison, a lifestyle columnist known more for charity event coverage than investigative integrity. But her byline was there, printed in bold beneath the hit piece that now cast me as some senile old villain lashing out at his family. I reread the article, this time slower. Every omission screamed louder than the words on the page. No context, no background. Just one polished quote after another from Malcolm and Judith, portraying themselves as helpless victims of a cruel, unpredictable man. A paper cut doesn't seem dangerous until you realize it can carry infection. This wasn't an accident. This was war. And I knew exactly who had fired the first shot. Lauren had always cared about appearances. Her social standing, her curated lifestyle, her carefully constructed identity of elegance and control. A single article like this in the right hands could quietly poison my name across dinner parties, golf courses, PTA boards, and nonprofit circles. It wasn't just a story. It was a warning. Stay in your place. Smile quietly in the photos. Send money. Be invisible. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before I moved. Then I went to my desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched since summer, the one labeled Mortgage Plus Transfers. Inside were 5 years of printed bank statements, check images, deposit confirmations, and wire transfers. I laid them out across the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. Over $175,000, not including the $45,000 down payment I'd scraped together after Angela passed, using funds we'd saved for a cross-country RV trip we never took. The last 3 Christmases alone had cost me over $8,000 in gifts, decorations, and food they insisted on hosting with my help. And now they wanted to rewrite history. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, stronger this time, and opened my laptop. I searched for Patricia Morrison, found her editor's contact information, and drafted a statement that made my hands shake not with fear but with clarity. I didn't send it, not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood that words alone wouldn't undo what they'd done. I needed something more surgical. The truth couldn't just be told, it had to be demonstrated, documented, witnessed. I opened Facebook. Lauren's page was public, because of course it was. She wanted people to see her life. There, right at the top, was a glowing post about hosting Christmas Eve dinner for 12 beloved family and friends. I clicked through the guest list. Names I recognized. Neighbors, colleagues, people who had read that article and probably shaken their heads at poor old Frank, the bitter dad who couldn't handle his son's success. I stared at the screen and smiled slowly. No anger, just precision. I had 5 days. 5 days to show them exactly what kind of man I was and what kind of family they had chosen to become. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the snow in Spokane had settled like icing sugar on every rooftop and tree branch, painting the world in deceptive stillness. But inside my house there was movement, quiet, methodical, deliberate. I packed 12 identical folders into my briefcase, each one carefully assembled with the precision of a man who'd built houses with his hands and rebuilt his dignity with numbers. Bank statements, mortgage records, wire receipts all neatly tabbed and highlighted. On top of each, I clipped a printed copy of the article that had smeared my name 3 days ago, now annotated in red ink with corrections, rebuttals, and quiet facts. I didn't need drama. I needed truth. And the truth was that I had funded every inch of their suburban fantasy while being slowly erased from it. At 6:45 p.m., I pulled up to Ryan and Lauren's home in Kendall Yards, where warm light spilled from every window, casting golden halos on the fresh snow. Cars lined the driveway, and I recognized the names on the license plates: guests from Lauren's book club, donors from Judith's foundation, Ryan's coworkers from the development firm I helped him join by pulling strings years ago. These were people who now likely viewed me as the grumpy patriarch who'd snapped. I parked across the street, cut the engine, and took a breath as steady as the one I took before Angela's funeral. Then I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house I'd helped them buy with money they pretended never existed. The front door, predictably, was unlocked. Safety, in their world, was a luxury they took for granted. I stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind me with care. From the dining room I heard laughter, forks clinking against china, and Judith's high-pitched voice recounting some story from a winery tour in Oregon. I followed the sounds and entered the room like a breeze that makes everyone look up just a second too late. 12 heads turned in unison. Judith's fork froze midair. Lauren's wineglass tilted. Ryan's face drained of color like someone watching a ghost step into the light. I didn't wait for permission. I walked calmly to the buffet sideboard, opened my briefcase, and began laying out the folders one by one. "Good evening," I said, my voice level. "I won't be staying long. Just dropping off some gifts. No wrapping paper, I'm afraid, just the truth." The room was frozen, except for one man, an older gentleman with a generous mustache and a red sweater who blinked, confused. "What's all this about?" he asked, glancing at the folders. "Receipts," I replied. 5 years' worth. Over $200,000 in mortgage payments, house renovations, appliance upgrades, and holiday expenses that I covered while being excluded from this very table. "Frank, this is neither the time nor the place," Judith snapped, rising from her seat, but I held up a hand. "Exactly, Judith. You said it yourself in the paper. I'm unstable, unpredictable, a danger to polite society. But since I've already been publicly convicted, I figured I'd offer the court some evidence." Lauren stood now, too, her face trembling at the edge of fury. "You're ruining Christmas." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined Christmas the moment you told me I wasn't welcome. I'm just giving it back to you, truthfully." A man near the end of the table opened one of the folders. His eyes scanned the numbers, his eyebrows climbing higher with each line. "This says you paid their mortgage?" he asked. "Every month for 5 years?" $3,000 a month, I replied. Automatically deducted from my account. Started when Ryan lost his job. Continued when Lauren decided her parents' comfort was more important than mine. Ended the day they uninvited me from Christmas dinner. The silence shifted from stunned to scorched. Guests looked at each other, then at Lauren and Ryan, whose carefully managed images were unraveling thread by thread. "And the article?" the woman next to him asked, lifting the paper. "Planted," I said, "by Malcolm through a mutual connection at the paper. Painted me as a cruel old man who left 2 helpless people at an airport. Never mentioned the money. Never mentioned the history. Just what they needed to preserve their reputations." "That's not true," Lauren snapped. "You're twisting everything." "Am I?" I said, turning to her. Or are you just angry that I won't disappear quietly like I was supposed to? Ryan finally spoke, his voice strained. Dad, please, this is embarrassing. No, I said. This is accountability. I gathered my empty briefcase, took one last look at the table where I used to imagine grandchildren, laughter, stories passed down like heirlooms, and turned to leave. You all enjoy your dinner, I said at the threshold. It's the last one I ever paid for. And with that, I stepped out into the cold Spokane night, alone but not unwelcome. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I chose to be. By the time the clock struck noon on Christmas Day, Spokane's social grapevine had already begun to tremble. Word of my uninvited visit had spread faster than pine needles on a dry carpet. It started with hushed phone calls among the women who'd sat around Lauren's table, some of whom had once praised her taste in table settings and parenting philosophy. Now, those same voices whispered a new tune. Did you know he paid their mortgage? For 5 years? Why wasn't that in the paper? I heard he brought documentation, full folders. Someone said she saw bank statements. The story was no longer theirs to control. That afternoon, I got a message from an old colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. Heard what you did? About time someone stood up to the country club cartel. Another from a neighbor. If you ever want to come by for Sunday dinner, we'd be honored. And one from my niece on Angela's side. Uncle Frank, that was legendary. I didn't respond to most. I wasn't looking for applause, but I won't lie and say it didn't feel good, better than I expected. Meanwhile, the silence from Lauren's house was deafening. For days there was nothing. No phone calls, no emails, no doorstep apologies with trembling voices and downcast eyes. Just silence, like the aftermath of a blizzard when the power's still out. Then, on the 29th, the fallout began to drip through the cracks. A columnist from the Spokane Gazette, a real one, not the lifestyle fluff types, reached out to clarify a few things about the article that had painted me as unstable. Turns out, a few people had called the paper after Christmas dinner and asked some pointed questions. Within 48 hours, the original article had been amended online. Small changes, allegedly inserted where once there were certainties. No formal record of airport weather conditions being hazardous. A brief acknowledgement that I had provided financial assistance to the family over several years. No apology, no retraction, but a correction public and permanent. That was enough. On New Year's Day, I poured myself a cup of real Colombian roast, not the store-brand blend I'd endured for years, and sat by the window watching the street outside. The snow was thinner now, grayer, like holiday glitter that had lost its shine. But the air was still, clean, free. That same morning, I finally opened a letter from my bank, confirming that the automatic withdrawal to the Jenkins mortgage had officially been canceled, no new activity since the 15th. That would make 2 full months missed. I knew the math as well as anyone. One more and the lender would send the formal notice. The kind that arrived by certified mail. I didn't wish foreclosure on anyone. But I also didn't feel responsible for stopping it. I had done enough. On the 3rd of January, my landline rang. I almost didn't pick up, but the name on the ID made me pause. Ryan. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Dad, he said, voice low. We got the letter. From the bank? I asked, sipping my coffee. Yeah, they're giving us 14 days to pay the arrears or they start foreclosure. Lauren's in pieces. Her parents are blaming her. And you? I asked. Who are you blaming? There was a long pause. Myself, mostly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have stood up to them years ago. I nodded, knowing he couldn't see it. And I know I can't ask you to fix this. I won't. That's not why I'm calling. I waited. I want a relationship again. With you. Not based on money or guilt, just if there's still a chance. I looked at the photo on my mantel, Angela in her garden, laughing. She'd always believed people could change, even when I didn't. It'll take time, I said, but I'm open to it. Thank you, he whispered. That means more than you know. After I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood quietly by the window, watching a new year rise slowly over the rooftops, sunlight warming the edges of a life that finally felt like it belonged to me again. Spring arrived in Spokane not with grand fanfare, but with gentle signs, a blue jay at the window sill, the smell of fresh soil after a soft rain, and the sound of neighborhood kids riding bikes without jackets. Life, it seemed, was waking up again. And so was I. My house no longer felt like a place I was surviving in. It had become a home again. I'd painted the living room a warm amber, the color Angela once said made her feel like the sun had kissed the walls. I hung new curtains, baked bread on Sundays, and invited quiet back into my life. Not the lonely kind, but the peaceful kind. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts and know they belong to you. On Easter morning, something unexpected happened. Ryan showed up at my door, not with excuses, not with a plea, but with a pie. Homemade. Cherry. My favorite. "I made this," he said a little sheepishly. "It's not perfect, but I figured maybe this year we don't do perfect. We just do honest." I opened the door wider. "You can come in," I said, "but only if you promise to stay for coffee, and tell me how you made that crust." He laughed, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't strained. We sat at my kitchen table, like father and son again, no ledgers between us, no resentment, just stories. He told me how he'd started working with his hands again, remodeling kitchens part-time. I told him about the workshop at the community center, how the younger couples called me Coach Frank. He asked about Angela's garden, and I promised to show him how the tulips were coming up. Later that afternoon, Lauren called not to justify, not to defend, but to apologize. Her voice trembled. "I know I can't undo what I said, what I let happen, but I'm working on being better, for Ryan, for the girls, for myself." I believed her, not because she was perfect, but because she was finally willing to admit she wasn't. And that's where healing begins. Over the next few weeks, the rebuilding was slow, but it was real. Ryan came by on Saturdays to help repaint the fence. Emily and Sophie sent me hand-drawn cards with glitter and crooked hearts that said things like, "We love Grandpa Frank," and "Thank you for the cookies." They didn't ask for money. They just wanted time, presence. The one gift I'd always had, and now was finally allowed to give freely. By summer, my porch was fixed, my fridge was full, and my calendar had more family dinners than doctor appointments. Rosa still called every Sunday. The neighbors waved when I watered the garden. And sometimes, when I sat outside in the evening with a glass of sweet tea and watched the sunset slide behind the mountains, I thought this is what winning feels like. Not revenge, not power, but restoration, dignity, belonging. One Saturday in July, Emily ran up to me during a cookout and handed me a Father's Day card she'd made late. It said, "You're the best kind of grandpa because you chose to stay, even when people weren't kind." I blinked back tears, lifted her onto my lap, and said, "Sometimes the best family is the one that learns to love better. And we're learning, kiddo. We're doing just fine." That night, as fireflies danced in the yard and laughter echoed from the porch, I looked around at the people gathered, not perfect, not polished, but finally real. And I realized something. The greatest gift wasn't the house, or the forgiveness, or even the justice. It was getting my life back, on my terms. It was knowing that I was never too old to be loved for who I truly was. It was having the courage to stop buying my place at the table so that when I finally sat down, it was because someone pulled out the chair and said, "We're glad you're here. Merry Christmas," I whispered to the stars above. Late, maybe, but right on time. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or something you've learned along the way, then we invite you to stay connected. Here on our channel, we believe in the power of stories that reflect real emotions, real families, and the quiet strength it takes to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. These aren't just tales. They're reflections of life, messy, beautiful, and deeply human. So if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about love, forgiveness, redemption, and the courage to start over at any age, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, and it lets us know that these stories matter to you. And if you want to help others discover them, give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. We'd also love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Did it remind you of someone? A moment in your life? A second chance you gave or wish you had? Scroll down to the comments and share your thoughts. This community is built on kindness, honesty, and shared wisdom. Your voice belongs here. Until next time, thank you again for listening. Be well, be kind, and remember, it's never too late to choose peace.